Hi everyone, this is the Nordic Venture Show, your guide to the exciting world of Nordic startups and venture capital.
All right, so when you think Nordic, what comes to mind? Vikings, like those fjords maybe.
Yeah,
That very cool minimalist design aesthetic.
it's very cool, yeah.
Get ready to add startup powerhouse to that list because today we are diving deep into why the Nordic region, so it's Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, is such a hotbed for innovation and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable when you think about it. We're talking about a region that geographically is pretty small, all things considered,
Right.
but they're having this really outsized impact on, the world of startups and venture capital.
Yeah, one of the sources we were looking at even called it a David versus Goliath scenario, which,
I love that.
yeah, I love that. So what's the deal? Like, is it just a fluke or is there something more at play here?
No, I really don't think it's luck. I think when you look at the sources that we're going to be diving into today, it points to a very deliberate and systematic approach that the Nordics have taken to cultivating what they call a thriving startup ecosystem.
Ecosystem. Now, there's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days.
Right.
What does that actually look like in action in the Nordics?
So you can almost imagine like a system where the government, universities, businesses, they're all kind of working together towards this common goal.
Okay.
And that goal is to foster innovation and to support entrepreneurs. So in the Nordics, you see this manifest in a few different ways. You see really robust public funding programs for startups. You see these close collaborations between universities and businesses to sort of spin out research and commercialize it. And then you also see a very supportive regulatory environment that really encourages risk-taking.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the how, let's talk about the wow for a sec.
Okay.
Because the source highlights some really impressive Nordic startups. I bet you've heard of at least a couple of these. Spotify, Klarna, Supercell, the gaming company.
Yeah.
These aren't just, local heroes. These are global powerhouses.
Massive. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about that group that you just, rattled off is how diverse the industries are that they represent. You've got music streaming, you've got fintech, you've got gaming.
Yeah.
And to me, that signals that, this Nordic approach isn't limited to just one specific industry. It's a much more fundamental approach to innovation that can be applied across the board.
So it's almost like they've cracked the code in a way
Yeah,
to creating a culture of innovation.
I think that's a great way to put it. And in the sources that we're looking at today, they kind of break down the secret sauce, if you will, into 4 key pillars of Nordic venture success. And I think the first and maybe the most important is this idea of public support.
Public support. Okay, so it's not just about like throwing money at startups, right? Like
Yeah.
what makes the Nordic approach to this different?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, while the financial support, whether that's grants, tax breaks, even in some cases direct investments, is definitely a factor, it's more the philosophy behind it that I think is really key. In the Nordics, there's this very strong belief that, a thriving startup scene benefits everyone.
Right.
It's not just about making a few entrepreneurs really rich.
Right.
It's about, lifting the entire economy.
Okay.
And I think that feeds directly into this second pillar, which is this real focus on long-term vision.
Okay.
This is where you see, I think, a really stark contrast with, say, the Silicon Valley model,
Okay.
which often prioritizes, rapid growth and disruption above all else.
Yeah.
The Nordics, very much playing the long game.
Yeah, the sources emphasize that a lot. Sustainability, ethical business practices, social responsibility.
Yeah.
It seems like those concepts are just deeply embedded into how they think about business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I mean, and a great example of this in action is the Danish company Ørsted.
Okay.
So they were at one point very heavily invested in fossil fuels.
Okay.
Like not exactly a poster child for sustainability, but they made this really conscious decision to completely transform themselves, and they're now a global leader in wind energy.
Wow.
So they saw the writing on the wall, climate change is real, we need to find alternative sources of energy.
Right.
But they also saw this as an opportunity to really align their business with their values.
Yeah.
And so I think they're a really interesting case study.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of picking up on a theme here. It's like they're taking those stereotypes, right, of like those happy, balanced Nordic societies that we always hear about.
Yeah.
And they're actually applying it to the business world.
Yeah, and that's a great observation, and that leads perfectly into this third pillar, which is this idea of a people-first culture.
Okay.
Right? So remember all those, those images of like the cozy apartments and like, people leaving work at 5.0 to go, have dinner with their families. Like
Well-
all that stuff we kind of joke about, like it turns out that's not just a cliche.
Right.
It's actually really deeply ingrained in the Nordic work culture.
So we're talking like generous parental leave policies,
Yeah.
flexible work arrangements, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a real emphasis on employee well-being,
Right.
Making sure that people don't get burnt out, that they have time for their personal lives, their families, their hobbies.
Yeah.
And what you end up with is a work environment that's really built on trust and collaboration and this real respect for individual needs.
Yeah. And I imagine that results in, much higher levels of employee satisfaction,
Absolutely.
lower burnout rates, like you said, and ultimately a more sustainable and humane way of building businesses.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, this all sounds incredibly appealing, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But it also kind of begs the question, if this Nordic model is so successful, why aren't more countries following suit?
It's a great question, and it's something that actually a couple of the sources touch on.
Okay.
And it leads us to our fourth and maybe our most intriguing pillar, which is this idea of untapped potential.
Untapped potential. Okay, so it's like the Nordics have this like secret weapon that the rest of the world hasn't quite figured out yet.
Yeah, in a way, I think that's true. I mean, while the Nordics have definitely been getting more attention globally, especially in like tech and the startup world, there's still this sense that they're kind of like flying under the radar a little bit.
Right.
Which actually, I think, creates this really unique opportunity both for investors and for entrepreneurs who are kind of paying attention.
So like almost getting in on the ground floor of something big.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. As Nordic companies, continue to grow and expand globally, they're going to need partners. They're going to need collaborators. They're going to need employees even who understand their culture, their values, their way of doing business.
Okay, so what you're saying is this isn't just like, a nice little story about, some Scandinavians doing their thing.
Right, yeah.
Like this actually has like real implications for anyone, anywhere in the world who's interested in, the future of business and how we do business, potentially.
Totally. And that brings us to the so what of all of this, right?
Why should we care about any of this?
Yeah, so I think there's two key reasons. First, inspiration. The Nordics really have, I think, proven that there's more than one way to build this thriving startup ecosystem. You don't have to follow the Silicon Valley playbook.
Right.
You can create something that is both economically successful and aligned with, maybe a broader set of values.
Yeah, I love that. It's like they're kind of rewriting the rules of the game a little bit.
Totally. And then the second thing is opportunity.
Okay.
Right. So as these Nordic companies, increasingly look outward, understanding their unique approach, I think gives kind of, like a competitive edge, or at least a starting point to say like, okay, here's how we might collaborate. Whether you're looking for investment, whether you're looking for partnerships, or even just, to kind of learn from what I think many would consider to be the best, the Nordics offer this kind of wealth of untapped potential still.
So to sum it all up then, we've got this region that's kind of punching above its weight in terms of innovation.
Absolutely.
They've got this very unique approach to business that prioritizes things like sustainability, collaboration, that people-first mentality.
For sure. Yeah.
And like you said, a whole lot of untapped potential just waiting kind of to be discovered.
Yeah.
And for people to kind of tap into.
It's exciting stuff. I mean, there's a lot going on over there.
Yeah. And on that note, I think I need to go book a trip to Copenhagen. I hear they have amazing bakeries.
Yes. And the licorice. Don't forget the licorice. It's, it's a very specific taste, but you never know. You might love it.
Okay, the licorice I might skip. But to everyone listening, consider this your invitation to kind of dive a little deeper into this world of Nordic innovation.
Yeah. Trust us, there is a lot more where that came from.
Thanks for listening to the Nordic Venture Show. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories of innovation from the Nordics.